Every pharmacy on Earth dispenses the craft Enoch assigns to the chief of the fallen Watchers. It is not Azazel. The Book of Enoch was removed from the Bible by the Council of Laodicea in 364 AD, banned, hidden, called dangerous by the church. But when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered at Qumran in 1947, 11 copies of Enoch surfaced, and Semyaza is named in the oldest of them. Chapter 6 names Semyaza chief of the 200. Azazel is 10th of 20. In the next several minutes, you'll see the muster roll, the oath he invented, and the verdict that blames the wrong angel. If forbidden biblical history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover another name the church tried to bury. If you open Genesis chapter 6, all you get is this. The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. In a few lines further down, there were giants in the earth in those days. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. 4 verses, and then the flood. That is the entire canonical account of the most consequential rebellion in the Hebrew Scriptures. No number, no mountain, no oath, and above all, no names. The sons of God arrive, they act, and they leave without ever introducing themselves. Except that the canon does hand you one name out of that catastrophe, and it hands it to you in a different book, Leviticus chapter 16. The Day of Atonement, the 2 goats, the lots cast over them. One lot for the Lord, the other, in the Hebrew, for Azazel, a word the older English Bibles smoothed into the scapegoat, because nobody was quite sure what else to do with it. One name out of 200, not the chief, not the one who called the meeting, the one attached to a goat and a cliff. And for 2,000 years, that has been the name people reach for. If you want the rest, I walked the full roster in the Azazel episode, and there is a card in the corner. Today we stay with one, and it is not him. The Bible never gives you the chief's name, but the older Jewish tradition was not nearly so restrained. The list survived, but only because someone took it the long way round. In 1952, 5 years after the first scrolls came out of the cliffs above the Dead Sea, Bedouin of the Ta, a mere A tribe, found the cave that scholars label Cave 4. It sits within sight of the ruined settlement of Qumran. It held the wreckage of a library, roughly 15,000 fragments from more than 500 manuscripts. Among them were 11 fragmentary manuscripts of the Book of Enoch in its original Aramaic. Paleographers date the oldest copy, cataloged as Fragment 4 Q201, to around 200 BC, older than Christianity, and older than almost every surviving manuscript of the Hebrew Bible. The man who eventually reassembled them was a Polish priest named Józef Mielik. His volume, The Books of Enoch, Aramaic Fragments of Qumran Cave 4, published by Oxford's Clarendon Press in 1976, remains the foundation of the field. But the Aramaic is fragments, and fragments do not give you a book. The only complete ancient copy of 1st Enoch that exists anywhere is in Ge'ez, the liturgical language of Ethiopian Christianity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church had never stopped reading it. The Western churches had simply forgotten. In 1773, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce came back from the Ethiopian highlands with 3 Ge'ez copies, one of which he deposited at the Bodleian Library at Oxford, where it sat largely ignored for nearly 50 years. In 1821, an Oxford professor named Richard Lawrence finally put it into English. In 1912, a Cambridge scholar named Charles produced the standard critical edition for Oxford University Press, working from Ge'ez, Aramaic, and Greek at the same time. When I quote from 1st Enoch in this episode, I am quoting from Charles, cross-checked against George Nickelsburg's 2001 Fortress commentary. Here is why the Aramaic matters for tonight, though, and it is not what the headline said at the time. The fragments did not simply confirm that the text was old. They exposed its seams. In the Aramaic, the chief of the 200 is not called Semyaza, he is called Shemi-Hazah. In Mielik's reconstruction, along with an analysis Nickelsburg published in the Journal of Biblical Literature in 1977, separated what had looked like one story into 2. There is a Shemi-Hazah narrative, which carries the descent, the oath, the wives, and the giants. And there is an Azazel narrative, shorter, sitting on top of it like a commentary written in the margin and later copied into the body. Azazel is the Aramaic form of the name your Bible spells Azazel. Strip the later layer away, and what is underneath is a story about the one who spoke first. So here is what the text says. And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Semyaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon, because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And these are the names of their leaders: Semyaza, their leader, Arakiba, Ramael, Kokabiel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakiyal, Asael, Armaras, Badarel, Ananel, Zakiel, Samsapiel, Sadarel, Turel, Yamyael, Sariel. These are their chiefs of tens. That is 1 Enoch chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, exactly as Charles rendered it in 1912. And in case you suspect the Ethiopian scribes of demoting Azazel on their own, there is a second, entirely independent witness. A Byzantine chronicler named George Syncellus, writing around the turn of the 9th century AD, quoted a Greek version of these same chapters into his chronicle. And that Greek version is blunter than the Gez. It calls Sem-i-Azazaz their chief archon. And of Azazel, it says that he was the first, but the 10th of the archons. 2 manuscript traditions in 2 languages from 2 ends of the Mediterranean, and both of them put him 10th. Now look at what the list actually is, because the order matters. 20 names, and the closing line tells you what they are. Chiefs of tens, 200 divided by 20. This is not a poem, it is a table of organization, and a name's position on a table of organization is administrative rather than decorative. Semyaza is not listed first because the scribe liked the sound of it. He is listed first and then labeled their leader a second time in case you missed it, which is the sort of redundancy you find in a document that expects to be argued with. Then look at verse 3, which is the only place in the whole rebellion where the chief opens his mouth. He does exactly the 2 things that make somebody a leader. He proposes the action, and he assumes personal liability for it. But notice what he is actually afraid of. He does not say he fears the deed. He does not say he fears God. He says he fears the others will not agree, and that he will be left paying alone. That is not the psychology of a tempter. That is the psychology of a committee chairman who has read the room and does not like his odds. So he invents an instrument, and the others hand it to him. An oath, sworn by all of them, binding each to all by mutual curses. Melik and Nickelsburg both note how peculiar this is as a piece of narrative machinery. There is no seduction in it. Nobody is deceived. It is a conspiracy in the strict sense, a mutual undertaking with a shared penalty, and its whole function is to make defection impossible. And here is the detail I find hardest to get past. The mountain is not named after the angels, it is named after the mechanism. They called it Hermon because of what was sworn on it, from the Semitic root behind words for a curse, a ban, a thing set apart under threat. The landmark commemorates the paperwork. He spoke first, and in this text, speaking first is the whole of the job. Which brings us to chapter 8, and to the part that makes the popular version of the story so lopsided. Chapter 8 is the register of forbidden crafts, and it opens with Azazel getting a full paragraph. Swords, knives, shields, breastplates, the metals of the earth and the art of working them, bracelets, ornaments, antimony, the beautifying of the eyelids, costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. It is vivid, it is specific, and it is the reason he is the one everybody remembers. Then verse 3 arrives and the chief gets 9 words. Semyaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. That is all. Arma Ras takes the next clause, Barakiyal the one after, and the chapter moves on down the roster, distributing astrology and clouds and the course of the moon. 9 words. Azazel had the better copywriter. I should be honest about how far the manuscript evidence takes this, because it takes it a long way, but not the whole way. Leek dated the Shemi Haza material to the oldest recoverable stratum and treated the expanded Azazel role as later editorial work. Nickelsburg reached a similar two-source conclusion by literary analysis rather than paleography. But Devorah D. Mont at the University of Haifa and others have refined and in places challenged Leek's exact stratigraphy, and the layering of chapters 6 through 11 is still argued over in print. So the careful way to put it is this. The proposition that Azazel is a secondary emphasis grafted onto an older Semyaza story is a strong and widely held reading, not a closed case. What is not in dispute in any manuscript in any language is the chain of command, and then the consequences that arrived. The giants are born, they consume everything men can produce, they turn on men, and the earth files a complaint. Chapter 9 opens with the 4 archangels looking down and seeing blood, and it takes the form of a report submitted upward. Read the report closely, because the whole problem of this episode is sitting inside it. Thou seest what Azazel hath done, who hath taught all unrighteousness on earth, and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven, which men were striving to learn. In Semyaza, to whom thou hast given authority to bear rule over his associates. That is chapter 9, verses 6 and 7. Azazel gets a full indictment with charges attached. The chief gets a sentence fragment and a job title. He is not accused of anything. He is identified. And then the verdict in chapter 10, verse 8. And the whole earth has been corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel. To him ascribe all sin. To him ascribe all sin. Not to the one who called the meeting, not to the one who drafted the oath. The chief is not acquitted, though. He is sentenced separately, and the wording is worth hearing. And the Lord said unto Michael, Go, bind Semyaza and his associates who have united themselves with women, so as to have defiled themselves with them in all their uncleanness. And when their sons have slain one another, and they have seen the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, till the day of their judgment and of their consummation, till the judgment that is forever and ever is consummated. 2 things in that sentence. First, the sequence. He is not bound immediately. He is made to watch his sons kill each other, and only then is he put away. The punishment is built to include the viewing. Second, the geography, or rather the lack of it. Azazel is handed to Raphael and taken to a named place, Dudael, and thrown onto rough and jagged rocks. Semyaza is handed to Michael and buried in the valleys of the earth. Nobody knows where the valleys of the earth are. There is nothing to look for. Azazel got an address. The chief got a landscape. You can hear the classical world in this, and it is not the parallel people usually reach for. The Prometheus story, the craftsman chained on a rock in the open air where everyone can see him, belongs to Azazel. Semyaza's sentence is the other Greek punishment, the Titans put under the mountains, out of sight, weighted down by geology rather than displayed on it. The one who spoke first is buried without a place name. And yet 9 words outlived him, and they are not the words you would expect. Go back to chapter 8, verse 3, and look at what enchantments and root cuttings actually is, because both halves are technical vocabulary, and neither is invented. Root cutting names are real profession. The Greek word is rhizotomos. the root cutter, and rhizotomoi were working practitioners in the same centuries in which this chapter was being copied. They dug medicinal roots, they knew where the plants grew, when to take them, and what they did. Diocles of Carystus is credited with something close to the first root cutter's treatise, a rhizotomicon. In Book 9 of Theophrastus's Historia Plantarum appears to draw on that tradition. Then, roughly 120 to 60 BC, a root cutter named Crateuas produced a rhizotomicon of his own, with descriptions and illustrations. Crateuas's book is lost, but it was a direct source for a Greek army physician named Paedaeneus Dioscorides, who between about 50 and 70 AD wrote a 5-volume work called De Materia Medica. That book never went out of circulation. It was still in use 1,500 years later. It was translated into Arabic in 10th century Cordoba. It is the ancestor of every pharmacopoeia in every regulated pharmacy in the world. And Dioscorides is routinely called the father of pharmacognosy, which is still the name over the door of university departments today. The other half of the phrase has an equally real address. Henrik Dravnell has argued in detail that the technical Aramaic terms clustered in chapter 8, verse 3, correspond closely to the documented working repertoire of the Babylonian incantation specialist, the Aishipu, whose handbooks survive on cuneiform tablets. Spoken formula plus prepared plant. Word and root together as one trade. Let me be exact about what I am and am not claiming. The scribe who wrote chapter 8 did not invent pharmacy, and nothing in that chapter caused Dioscorides. This is descent, not causation. But the craft that chapter assigns to the most senior defendant in the case is a craft with a continuous, documented professional lineage that runs from a man with a knife in a basket to a global industry with a Latin vocabulary and a regulatory framework. The one who spoke first was given 9 words. And one of those 9 words is a job that still exists. The name did rather well for itself too, which is the part almost nobody knows. When Melik was working through Cave 4, he identified fragments of a separate Enochic composition that scholars now call the Book of Giants, and he recognized it as the ancestor of a text that had turned up on the other side of Asia. In 1943, a scholar named Walter Henning published Middle Iranian fragments of a Manichaean Book of Giants recovered from Torfan in Chinese Central Asia. In those fragments, the Aramaic Shemihaza appears as Shamizad, and his giant son Oya has been renamed Sam, after a hero of the Iranian epic tradition. While the Western churches were losing the name entirely, it was being copied out along the Silk Road in a different alphabet, in a different religion, attached to a Persian strongman. And the mountain is still there, 2,814 meters on the borders of Israel, Syria, and Lebanon, and still named after a promise that 200 angels made to each other because their chief was afraid of being the only one who signed. In my reading, chapters 6 through 11 are not really a story about angels. They are a document about how blame gets assigned, and the scribes who assembled it understood that process better than most people are comfortable admitting. They knew that the memorable offender and the responsible one are rarely the same figure. They knew that the man with the interesting product gets the paragraph, and the man who called the meeting gets a job title. They put both facts into the same 11 chapters and let them sit there, unreconciled, for 2,000 years. In one sentence in the judgment still refuses, at least for me, to sit straight. To him ascribe all sin. I can read that verdict 3 ways on 3 different mornings. It might be a seam, the fingerprint of an editor who cared more about the Azazel material than the story he inherited. It might be a scribal error of emphasis that nobody dared correct once the text was authoritative. Or it might be a deliberate theological claim, and a rather sophisticated one, that the supplier of the means is more culpable than the convener of the meeting, that handing over the sword and the antimony does more lasting damage than proposing the crime. I have not made up my mind, which brings us to the question underneath this whole episode. Is the text telling us that heaven got the chain of command wrong? Or is it telling us that heaven does not grade by chain of command at all? and that our instinct to look for the person in charge is a human habit the scribes were quietly refusing to indulge. Somebody spoke first, and the text will not quite say that it mattered. Next time, we stay inside the same verse and move down exactly one line. Armaros, 11th on the roster, who in the Greek that Syncelus preserved is called Pharmaros. His assigned craft is the strangest entry in the whole chapter because it is not a crime at all. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments, the undoing, the counterspell. Somebody in that scriptorium decided that breaking a curse was its own forbidden art, requiring its own named teacher and its own punishment, and I want to know what that tells us about how these scribes understood knowledge itself. Before you go, a question, and it is the one this episode is actually about. If you were sitting in judgment, which one would you have bound first? The angel who called the meeting, or the angel who handed out the tools? I read the replies on these, and on this one I would like to be argued with. If you enjoyed this one, give it a like. It genuinely helps the channel, and subscribing means you will not miss the next one. See you then.